train journeys are among the most epic and hardcore on the planet.
There's like ice picks stabbing at my stomach wall.
Taking people through the world's harshest environments.
No train has ever gone further north than this one right here.
Overcoming technical challenges.
Look at this, I don't want to go over this in a train.
These trains are a vital link to remote communities.
People live along the tracks, so this is their only means home.
Sustaining a region's economy.
There's one of the sugarcane carriages that didn't quite make it.
And even changing the course of history.
It's because of this line that the country feels united.
These are the world's tough trains.
I'm traveling along one of the greatest engineering feats of the 19th century, the Transcontinental Railroad. It's taking me 3,000 miles across an entire continent, from ocean to ocean, passing through 12 states, 4 time zones, and some of America's most epic landscapes. Welcome back to the Age of Steam. This is Tough Trains USA.
The United States of America is home to the world's largest rail network, spanning an incredible 140,000 miles. From the very first steam locomotives in the early 1800s, railroads have shaped the country as we know it today, changing its economy, its politics, and power. Completed in 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad connected 2 oceans and united a country. It enabled trade across an entire continent, opened up the West to settlers, and changed America forever.
My journey is taking me back in time to these railroads' roots. It's a time of industrial and technological revolution, a time of war, a time of corruption and uncertainty, and a young nation bursting with ambition.
Following the history of railroads in the U.S., my epic journey begins in Baltimore, the birthplace of American rail travel. Next, I'm off to New York, before heading to Chicago, where I join the California Zephyr and retrace the Transcontinental line. Along the way, I'll stop at Omaha, Denver, Salt Lake City, Truckee, and Sacramento before ending my journey by boat to San Francisco. Incorporated in 1827, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was one of America's earliest railroads and the first one to carry passengers and freight. It began operations in 1830, taking passengers along 13 miles of track to Ellicott Mills. It was a pioneering project during the early days of steam. And I'm off to meet local historian Dave Shackelford to find out more about these first experimental rail lines.
Over here, this is a reproduction of one of the first horse-drawn cars that was used on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Horses pulled cars just because the B&O didn't feel that they had a steam engine that could handle the sharp curves and the steep grades of the Patapsco River and Potomac River valleys. And right here, we actually have one of the true original engines in our collections and one of the earliest ones that we have.
This looks like a science lab.
It does look like something out of a 1950s horror movie, and especially when everything gets moving. Back in the day, they called these grasshoppers, and because when the rods got moving up and down and the piston was pushing up and down, it reminded people of the legs, the insects. This is the most recognizable symbol of the industrial age in America. This is what you saw every day heading out of Baltimore and heading west.
Would it still work today, do you think?
This would definitely run today. You re-boiler it and you make sure that everything's working, and it could go under steam again.
That's incredible. Totally built to last. So when the rest of the nation saw the success of this, did they replicate that?
When the B&O began operations, there were only 23 miles of rail in the entire country, and 13 were B&O miles. And in the heyday of railroading, you're looking at the 1920s, about 280,000 miles of rail. Wow. So it literally did build America. It was its first big business. But in the heyday of railroading, this complex was about 100 acres, 30 buildings, and was a self-contained industrial city where all aspects of railroading were handled. We talk about it as being the birthplace of American railroading Lots of people who worked on other railroads throughout the country, they learned their trade right here with the Baltimore and Ohio. And they would take that technology and they take that experience and they would help build America.
Sadly, these engines aren't up and running, so I'm driving 90 minutes into the heart of the Amish country to visit the Strasburg Railroad and take a look at some locomotives in action.
She's a beaut. What is this, about a 1906 model 945?
Oh, pretty close, 1910.
1910, that's amazing. She still works. Walk me through the process. I mean, it looks very impressive, but it also looks very complex. What makes it steam?
Back here is called your firebox. Okay. This big gray area here, if you look inside the hole so you can see the flames.
That's nice and warm, toasty.
It certainly is. All that firebox is surrounded by water, and then this round portion here is a whole bunch of tubes inside there that go from here the whole way up toward the front of the locomotive. There's about 1.5 or 2 feet of actual space that's above the water to the top of the boiler. That's where the steam is stored. The engine opens the throttle, the steam goes through a series of pipes up here, which go into a valve and into a cylinder. And then the cylinder is a giant piston. The steam goes against the piston and pushes this rod backwards, makes the wheels go around.
That is so complex. Are they pretty easy to drive? Is it something I can hands-on help you with? Or?
Well, sure, you can help us with a little bit with it.
Get an appreciation for like the work that goes into making this thing run.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you come on up in the cabin and take a look?
Yep.
Before you get in the cab, I got something for you to put on.
All right.
Nobody can get in the cab without having some bibs and some gloves.
This is so funny. When I was a kid, I actually had an overall Oshkosh Bigosh.
Yes.
And we would pretend that we were driving trains. Here I am getting to put one on and do it for real.
Ready to hop up there?
Yeah, we got to be careful. All right, so this is going to be hot.
Yep. About 360 degrees.
Toasty, nice.
Yeah, it feels all right. This is Ross. He's our fireman for the day.
Hey, Ross.
He'll be the one shoveling the coal and making sure the water is at the proper level in the boiler. There's a water gauge right here that tells you how much water is in the locomotive's boiler.
Yeah.
And then that big gauge up there is your actual steam gauge. Okay, here we go. I'm on the throttle right. Brakes just released. I'm opening the throttle right now.
Have it through,
Yep. And then bang the heel of the shovel off the opening.
Ah, look how much I missed.
You gotta get it in the door, yeah. Also watch where your coal goes, because you keep throwing it in there, you don't know where your coal's actually going, so you gotta keep track of that.
So you got to keep some on the right, some on the left, some in the front, some in the back.
Exactly. You'd have to be a lot more than you were doing there and a lot quicker than you were doing there. Otherwise, your fire will burn out, especially in the front. It's a young man's job. So you start out here and end up over there. That's paying your dues.
Is it something that I could try? Can I please try to drive the train?
Well, I think we can give it a shot.
Yeah, I do.
All right.
Now remember, kids, with power comes responsibility. Okay, so first I need to
Release that and we'll bring it right back.
forward, okay?
There you go, that's good. Now open your throttle. You'll feel it. Oh, back her up a little bit. Back her up a little bit. That's okay. That's all right. You're good.
Right there?
Good. Good.
Ah, this is a glorious sound.
There you go. Go.
Yes!
A little more throttle.
A little more throttle.
More throttle. Not quite that much. Engage the
All right,
gun.
can you give me some more fire, please?
All right, now I want you to start backing your throttle off. Okay, then go back 1 notch, like that. Now put this brake on the whole way to the front. Like that. All right, good.
And there you have it, folks. Got us here nice and safely. It's a bit of an effort, but I think it went really well.
I think it did too.
Thank
We're still
you.
on the tracks.
That was really exciting.
All right.
After the success of the Baltimore-Ohio Railroad, other lines began to pop up all along the eastern seaboard, connecting trade routes with rivers and the Atlantic Ocean.
Gradually, line by line, railroads were making their mark on America, enabling goods to be shipped and passengers to move around the country. By 1837, at least 200 new railroads were being promoted, and by the end of the decade, 2,750 miles of track were already in operation. And that was just the beginning.
I'm taking a 2.5-hour trip to one of the greatest cities in the world, New York.
Here we are, New York City.
New York's first railroad was built in 1831, encouraging growth and an influx of people and new businesses. Before the end of the decade, 4 competing railroads operated in the city.
This is New York.
Today, New York is America's largest city with a population of over 8 million.
There it is, New York's Grand Central Terminal. And it really is grand. It's almost like a temple to the railroad's illustrious past. Built in 1913, it covers more than 48 acres, mostly underground, making it the biggest and busiest railway station in the world. 21.6 million visitors come here each year, making it no longer just a means to get to a destination, but a destination in and of itself. Let's go have a look. You could say that this is where time as we know it today began. That clock up there is a monument to Eastern Standard Time, and it's here because railroads are actually responsible for giving us our time zones in North America. Prior to this, time was told by measuring the height of the sun. When it was straight up, it was 12 o'clock. But 12 o'clock on the East Coast was different than 12 o'clock on the West Coast. And with so many trains sharing the same track, timing was crucial. Miscalculations were fatal. So in 1883, railroads imposed time zones to write timetables that could effectively manage their tracks. Pretty cool, huh?
I'm here to meet Dan Brucker, who can give me a behind-the-scenes tour.
We have more tracks and track platforms than any other terminal in the world. And trains arriving here every 47 seconds during the morning rush hour. Wow. Ultimately, 700 trains arrive here, bearing 1,200 customers per each train. Coming through the terminal as a whole are going to be 750,000 people, which is the entire population of the entire city of San Francisco. The entire population of Alaska comes coursing through here every single day.
Why did they pick this location?
There was no city around here.
It's hard to imagine because right now it feels like the center of the universe.
They virtually built a city around this terminal. All the trains coursing in and out of here, which now had to be buried under the streets because Park Avenue was being built up, they couldn't be steam underground because you blind all the operations. So they had to be made electric. Virtually all of New York drew here to this area like a magnet. And now to this day, it is so large, it is so grand, we're going to be expanding further downward. We are now building skyscrapers down into the ground.
Wow.
Where we are right now is the very introduction to transcontinental railroad travel in the United States of America. It was called the Gateway to the Nation, because wherever you were traveling in the US of A, this indeed was their takeoff point. The scoops, which you can see on the marble floors, that's where customers were sitting on benches, anxiously shuffling their feet.
So there were benches all along here, and they're sitting there like, oh.
Yes, just waiting anxiously to begin this magnificent journey.
I know how they feel. I can't wait to kick off the next leg of my journey either. But first, I need a ticket.
If I wanted to go to Chicago, how would I figure that out?
Oh, darling, you want to go to Chicago?
Yeah, I was thinking of going there for the weekend,
Amtrak.
you know.
You have to go to Amtrak. This is their address, Penn Station.
A totally different station, okay?
Whole different station.
Typical. I'm in the biggest railway station on Earth, and I'm still in the wrong place. A quick cab ride across town, and I'm in the second biggest railway station in New York, Penn Station.
All right, you're gonna go right in there and to the left.
Take it. By 1860, the veins of the U.S. Railroad stretched far and wide, connecting Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, and Pennsylvania with the East Coast. The center for railroad domination became my next stop, Chicago. New York to Chicago is a marathon 800-mile, 19-hour journey. It's lucky I've got myself a sleeper.
Personal size, sink, toilet, bed.
Compared to most of the other trains I've traveled on, these Amtrak trains are anything but tough.
That is incredible. They actually fit. I'm 6'4", and a lot of times I don't fit in these things. But this one I can lay down. I think I'm gonna like it here.
There's full amenities on all Amtrak cross-country trains.
Oh. Nice flavor.
So after a bite to eat in the dining car and a quick shower, it's time to catch up on some sleep.
Hopefully when I wake up, I'll be in Chicago. All right.
Coming into the outskirts of suburban Chicago and noticing a lot of changes going on in the scenery. It's just become very, very industrial. Lots of factories and mills and freight trains. And what's neat is every now and then I can see Lake Michigan peeking through in the back. It's a beautiful, beautiful turquoise. All right, 20 hours and 800 miles later, I made it to the Windy City.
Chicago's very existence is defined by its rail links. Situated with access to the shipping routes of the Great Lakes, it was the point from which east and west railroads radiated. Today, the U.S. rail freight industry is worth $80 billion, transporting 5 million tons of goods every day.
40% of the country's freight trains pass through Chicago. Some of them are up to 2 miles long. They just keep on coming from all directions. Look at them.
With the benefits of railroads becoming obvious, the idea of a transcontinental railroad captured the imagination of America. And as early as 1844, possible routes across the country were surveyed.
In 1861, Abraham Lincoln became the 16th president of the United States of America. He ascended to power at a time of political instability and uncertainty, inheriting a nation on the verge of civil war. The South was threatening to secede from the North, and the need to unite the West to the East was never more apparent. Railroads were the answer.
The first shots were fired at Fort Sumter in 1861, and before long, the country was in all-out civil war. The Confederates, led by Jefferson Davis, had separated from the rest of the United States and formed their own government. The main obstacle seemed to be agreeing on a route. In 1862, with the southern states distracted by civil war, a route was finally agreed upon and the Transcontinental Railroad bill was passed. The war lasted 5 grueling years and saw some of the bloodiest combat of the modern world. I'm meeting up with Professor Ted Karamansky to find out how the railroads were used in the Civil War.
How many casualties were there during the Civil War?
Over 800,000 Americans died, and that's more than died in the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Mexican War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam War combined, all of those conflicts.
Really?
So this was the most deadly moment in our history.
Tell me about this monument here.
The monument was dedicated back in 1895 to the over 4,000 Confederates who died in Chicago during the Civil War. The largest mass grave in the United States.
Wow.
These were soldiers who were captured down in Tennessee, in Alabama, and Mississippi, and then brought back by train to prisoner of war camps in the north. And one of the largest of those camps was a place called Camp Douglas here in Chicago.
Why did they all die there?
Well, it was mainly disease. These poor southern boys were just country kids. They weren't used to the diseases of cities or groups. It's odd to think that here in the city of Chicago there's more Confederate dead than on any Civil War battlefield. But that's because of the railroad.
Were the railroads instrumental in the war?
Oh, totally. It was the great advantage that Northern forces had over the Confederacy. Confederacy's huge. If you think about it, in Europe, it stretches like from Normandy to east of Moscow. And so the invention of the railroads gave Union forces an edge that great generals of the past, like Napoleon, didn't have.
So both the North and the South had access to railways. Why did the North win?
The Confederacy had railroads, but they were much fewer. The North outnumbered Southern mileage by 3 to 1.
Sherman was from the North, and he was using the rails to supply food for his army too, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. He had a 500-mile-long line of supply on the rails. Without that, he would have needed 220,000 mules and over 38,000 wagons if those wagons could have moved 20 miles a day, which is a big if over the rough southern countryside. So rails could go ahead and do that so much more efficiently. Union forces literally rode the rails to victory in the Civil War.
I'm off on a 9-hour, 500-mile journey through America's Midwest to see where the Transcontinental Railroad started at Council Bluffs. Amtrak's California Zephyr route runs daily from Chicago to San Francisco.
Give me 5. Up high. Down low. Too slow.
Today, it's the closest a passenger can get to traveling on the Transcontinental Railroad.
I'm really excited. We're about to cross the Mississippi River. It's the second longest river in the U.S. It's 2,320 miles and borders 8 states. The way this is set up, it's like an IMAX. The screens everywhere. Taking it light. The sunset is amazing.
Omaha was founded in 1854 and is the largest city in the state of Nebraska. Council Bluffs sits just east of the river in Iowa, where the Union Pacific started its transcontinental dreams. 2 companies were contracted to complete the monumental task of building nearly 2,000 miles of track. The Central Pacific started in Sacramento and built east, and the Union Pacific started here in Council Bluffs and built west. The exact meeting point, however, was still to be decided. I'm meeting up with Patricia LeBounty to find out more about the Union Pacific and the men who ran it.
We had an interesting individual working for Union Pacific at the beginning. His name was Thomas Durand, and he was vice president of Union Pacific in 1862-63. And he kind of had a very creative aspect on how to fund the railroad, you know, so he...
Watch out for those guys that want to be creative about how your money's being spent.
Exactly. He and another individual decided to create a corporation, Credit Mobilier of America. Really what it was railroad investors paying themselves to build the railroad. It was essentially an accounting way to trade money around. They had the opportunity to make a lot of money very quickly. So Durant started out actually right away saying that he needed the railroad to be built south, starting in Omaha and then going south in a loop and then back up to the Platte River Valley. And this was something that the engineer at the time, Peter Day, refused to do, and he actually quit over it.
He must have been getting paid by the mile.
He was, that's right.
So he's thinking, more miles I can get out of here.
That's right. Especially at the tricky beginning when it was a hard sell. People really thought that this was a pie-in-the-sky, bridge to nowhere sort of a thing, that this wasn't actually going to happen. There was a lot about the railroad that was contentious. For example, the line. Who was going to decide where this line would go? And so cities and towns started to lobby Union Pacific. Build it here, we want you to end here. And then Durant started playing them off one another to see what the best deal he could get would be.
Did they all feel like it was worth their investment?
May 10th, 1869, people were elated. This was monumental for the United States. It literally changed the way Americans ate. We were able to then have food going, fresh food going from coast to coast. You were able to cross the country in 7 days as opposed to 6 to 7 months by wagon. Costs went down. Instead of $1,000 at the time to take your wagon and get all the way to California, it was only $100. So suddenly, people started to be able to move around. They started to be able to communicate. You can liken it to landing on the moon.
One of the things I love about rail travel is the people you meet along the way, all on their own personal journey.
How are you?
Good, how are you? Well, looks like you're hitting the road for a while, huh?
Yeah. A very long time.
Yeah?
About another 5 months or so.
Another 5 months. How long have you been on the road?
Well, last year, from March to November, we walked about 3,000 miles from Delaware to Denver. So we can start earlier this year. We're going to go ahead and take a train to San Francisco and walk back to Denver.
You're walking
across America. We locked up our home a year ago and rented a car one way to Delaware to the Atlantic Ocean and took off walking, not knowing where we're going to stay, who we're going to meet.
Is this the craziest thing you guys have done?
Yes,
Probably so,
definitely.
yeah.
Everybody thinks that America and the whole world is full of hateful people, but that's not what we found.
We've had complete strangers that we met just on the side of the road, and then they call us an hour later and say, "Hey, we booked you 2 nights in this hotel when
we
you
want
get
to take
this
you out to
town,
dinner.
or we want to take you out to dinner."
They're
and
like
it's
paying
like,
it forward type
Right.
stuff.
and it's like, this is amazing.
We've walked through
commitment.
thunderstorms. We've been in like 17-degree snowy weather. We've been in swarms of mosquitoes. Our daughter here got Lyme's disease on the trail, and she continued to walk.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Exactly.
The original Union Pacific line is still used by freight trains today and travels west through Nebraska and Wyoming. Amtrak's California Zephyr route runs a little further south, and the next stop of my journey takes me across the plains to Denver, Colorado.
Hopefully when I wake up, I'll be looking at the Rockies in Denver.
From Chicago to Denver, the landscape is uncompromisingly flat as the train travels through the heart of America's Midwest farming country.
Starting to get a lot clearer view of these mountains. They're all snow-capped right now, which is really pretty. It almost looks like just this magical, heavenly scene just hovering above everything, just floating mountains. Denver, Colorado.
Located on the rolling plains, Denver, the mile-high city, is exactly 1 mile above sea level. The arrival of railroads transformed Denver from a western frontier town into a modern, prosperous city. Today, it has a population of over 600,000 people.
Following the discovery of silver and gold in the Rockies, railway lines gorged their way through nearly every high canyon and pass of it, bringing the precious metals down to the city and a lifeline of supplies back up to the miners.
Georgetown is home to one of the USA's last surviving mining railroads. I'm off to meet Kevin, who has agreed to give me a ride on this historic line and a tour of the Lebanon mine. The Georgetown Loop was completed in 1884 to haul precious minerals out of the heart of the Rockies. To get to the mine, we spiral and corkscrew for 4.5 miles, gaining an elevation of 600 feet.
Yikes, I just looked down and saw we're right on this narrow bridge. This is crazy.
The one thing I like to tell people about this bridge that we're going over is it's 100 feet high from the center point of the creek. It's 100 feet when you look up at it, and it's still 100 feet when you're looking down. It just seems like it's grown.
Yeah, it does. So this train line rolls right into a mine at the top of the mountain?
It's going up to one of over countless dozens of mines that were serviced by this line back in the day.
The main purpose of these narrow gauge trains was to actually bring minerals out of the mountains.
Exactly. In the early days, they brought the miners, their families up here. They would bring the mine timbers, the firewood, food, fuel, whatever you needed. It could be brought up here quickly and economically, and then they'd turn right around and take the gold and silver back down to the Transcontinental Railroad far more efficiently and economically than any wagon company could ever hope to provide. A lot of the booms that you see in Alaska, in California, Nevada, here in Colorado, would have been very different without the railroad's assistance. Some fields would have been avoided. They would have said, yeah, there's gold there, but we can't get to it. There's no way to build a road up there. There's no way to get wagons up there, or we just can't reach it, including here in Georgetown.
So this is where people were rushing to when they're heading out west on the Transcontinental Railroad.
This was one of many destinations that they could reach by the time the Transcontinental was completed. Any railroad realized that the key to their survival was going to be connecting to the Transcontinental. That was the Concorde of its time.
Yeah.
So a lot of these railroads extended. That's really what got this all going. These were all feeding into the Transcontinental in one way or another.
30 minutes later, we finally reached the end of the line.
So these guys were from New York?
The owners were. Most of the miners were a mix of Cornish miners. They were from Wales. You're definitely going to want to watch your head right up here. The rest were coming from all over, from Europe and from the East Coast, trying to make a name for themselves in the mining business.
How deep does this go?
This goes back about 1,200 feet into the mountainside.
Which came first, the rails for mines or the railroads?
Definitely the mines. Originally what they were doing is they were packing it all out on their backs. Then they thought, well, maybe a wheel's going to work better. The problem is, you put weight on a wheel in mud, it's going to be very hard to move.
Right.
Then they said, well, what if we had it roll on something it's not going to sink on? Boom. Rails are introduced into the mines.
Bam.
And they offered very low rolling resistance, very heavy loads could be moved back and forth with a great deal of ease. And then the railroads picked up on this idea and they used exactly the same.
Why is it snaking in and out and not just straight?
This tunnel is doing what's called drifting. They were wandering back and forth looking for signs of silver ore in the rock. When they came around this bend, they finally found what they were looking for. They hit the mother lode here. This enormous cavern was one huge silver vein called the Morning Star lode.
How much silver was pulled out of here?
About $500,000 in the 1880s.
What's that equate to today?
About 35 million.
These are their actual tools just left behind.
This is stuff they left behind. When the bottom fell out of the market, these mines expected the price to recover and they'd come back to work. They left everything underground. This has been sitting here idle since 1893, waiting for a crew to come back to run it.
So I could use a good 35 million right about now.
Who couldn't?
The gold rush in Colorado brought in people from all over the country, including some of the wildest events of the Wild West. And like most Western towns, the first building was always a saloon. So it seems only appropriate that I go to the oldest restaurant in Denver for a beer. I'm off to meet author Dick Kreck to find out more about life in the Wild West.
Dick, we're in Colorado, the heart of the Wild West. How did it get that name?
Early on in the 1850s, 60s, it was a very wild place. It was mostly saloons and gambling parlors and houses of prostitution and...
Reckless.
Yeah, there were like 6,000 guys working on the railroad at one time. So murder a day was not unusual in downtown Denver.
So that's how they settled their problems, they just shot each other.
Or knifed or strangled.
So what was life like for the railroad workers heading out west, building on the Transcontinental Railroad?
It was terrible. They were paid $3 a day, which was a good salary back then, but they worked every day from sun up to sundown. And as they moved along, every 100 miles, they would stop. And all of those saloon keepers and gamblers and pimps and prostitutes would move along with the railroad. And so wherever they stopped, these towns would pop up. They put the town on flat cars and hauled it to the next end of track. If you see photographs of it, it looks like a real town. They have storefronts, but they're mostly tents with false fronts.
Tent towns.
Tent towns, exactly, and they can put up a whole town in like 2 days. They became known as Hell on Wheels.
So it was literally a town on wheels.
Yes,
rolling through,
yes, and
setting up camp,
partying for a while.
Right.
Making a dent on the place
Yep.
and moving on and rolling along.
Yeah, and when the railroad left, so did all the workers, and so did all of the people preying on the workers. And so it kind of fell back to just being a town. Some of them disappeared, some of them thrived. But by the 1880s and 90s, it was starting to settle down as more women showed up, and they began building schools and churches, and it became more of a community.
The railway workers were not the only victims of the relentless progression of the railroads. The country's Native American population also suffered great losses as the railroad steamrolled across the country. I'm off to meet Ben Sherman, a member of the Oglala Lakota Nation, to find out more about how the railroads changed the lives of the Native American communities.
All these plains, before the railroads came through, were just covered with millions of buffalo. Is that right?
Yes, the estimates are perhaps 60 million.
60 million?
But this is through the entire United States, the Central Plains, and up into Canada.
How important were the buffalo to the Native American tribes that were living here?
The buffalo were everything. You know, the buffalo provided food and shelter. The buffalo was also at the center of a lot of spiritual ceremonies too. A great deal of kinship to the buffalo. So the people depended on the buffalo just for survival.
There's stories of people just shooting buffalo off the train for game.
Yes, and of course the construction of the railroads required a lot of food for all the workers. You may know of Buffalo Bill. He was one of those who helped supply meat to the railroad workers. And then the people who rode the trains out, they shot the buffalo just for sport, leaving the carcasses out here to rot. They killed them for no reason, just for the fun of killing the buffalo. I would imagine at that time, after the railroads came through, there were no buffalo here in this part of the country.
How did the Native Americans react to the railroads just totally taking over their land?
The indigenous people had to do something, and it became all-out war eventually. The tribal nations attempted to stop construction in various number of ways, and that included attacking the surveyors. We knew what they were doing out here. You know, they were plotting the land where they wanted the railroad to go, cutting telegraph wires, perhaps attacking a train here and there. In 2 or 3 cases, actually causing derailment of train cars.
Do you think the U.S. government saw the railroads as a means to solve the Indian problem?
There are not enough adjectives or superlatives to describe the impact of what happened to Native Americans. The people who were promoting the railroad, the industrialists, the politicians, the speculators, they wanted people out here. And so what better way to do it than to clear the Native Americans out and make the land available for farming. And that's what the railroad helped the government and the speculators do. There was no other place to move the Native Americans to, so what to do with them? Put them on reservations, kill them off, you know, all those kind of options were taken.
Do you think what happened to the Native Americans is ever forgivable?
I'll turn that back to you and ask you if genocide is ever forgivable. You know, 100 years later, we're talking about the Armenian genocide. We're always talking about the Holocaust. In the United States, perhaps 10 million Native Americans were lost. So to me, that qualifies as genocide. And I don't think there's any forgiveness for genocide.
Listening to Ben makes me question the meaning of terms like progress and civilization. On the one hand, the railroads brought America growth and prosperity, but on the other, it brought victimization and great suffering to the Native American people.
I'm off on a spectacular 15-hour trip through the Rockies to Salt Lake City.
All right, I'm starting to climb up the mountains. I'm really excited. can feel the elevation getting higher and higher. Eventually we're gonna get up to 10,000 feet. And parts of it can be quite windy. In fact, there was a part that they had to build a windshield because at first the train actually blew off the track. I mean, that's some serious gusts. Coming out of Denver, there are 149 miles of Rockies, 200 different peaks.
In the first hour alone, we'll pass through 27 tunnels.
The tunnel we're about to go through, Moffett Tunnel, is 6.2 miles long at 9,000 feet. It's the highest point at which Amtrak travels in this country. It was completed in 1927 at the price of $18 million.
This is the third leg of my trip spent on the Zephyr, so I think it's high time I chipped in and help out the staff who've made my journey so enjoyable.
You're going to let them know we're 10 minutes away from Glenwood Springs, Colorado.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're 10 minutes away from
Glenwood Springs, Colorado.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are 10 minutes away from Glenwood Springs, Golden, Colorado. Thank you for riding Amtrak. I said Golden, Colorado.
I know you did. I know, Golden. When are we going to go to Golden?
Maybe I'm best just to sit back and enjoy the ride. To call the variety of landscapes on display up here eclectic wouldn't be an exaggeration. To call them breathtaking would be an understatement.
That was so amazing. The toughness of the terrain. And the fact that they actually built a railroad through there, kind of mind-boggling. It's dreamlike. It almost feels like I got a glimpse of heaven.
Promontory Summit lies 100 miles north of Salt Lake City and is home to one of the most important locations in the history of the Transcontinental Railroad. This is the spot where the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific tracks met. The Central Pacific was formed by a group of Sacramento merchants and businessmen in 1861.
What an enormous achievement this was. For every mile, it would take 350 rails, 10,000 spikes, and 2,500 wooden ties. Blood, sweat, and tears went into laying these rails, and the result was to modernize America and connect the nation.
In 1869, the last piece of track, a golden spike, was driven home by a silver hammer to complete the line and cement this monumental point in American history. Here at the Golden Spike National Historic Site, they have replicas of the locomotives present at the ceremony, some of the first to cross the continent. I'm meeting up with David Kilton to find out more about this historic event.
David, this is a very important spot. What happened here?
Standing at the location where they completed the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10th, 1869, this was a very significant event in changing everything, not maybe even just within the United States, but throughout the world.
How did they pick this spot?
It's kind of an interesting story. Now, building the railroad, you had businessmen. They actually built about 250 miles past each other. With the grade, they just prepared the roadbed, the nice flat roadbed, which was even harder part of the work than laying the rails, because they wanted to keep collecting money as long as they could, until the federal government stepped in and said no more. When the government finally did step in, they both had 30 miles of track that they had to complete, so a 60-mile gap that they finished
to reroute
in the month to finish at this spot.
Were people just like celebrating, going crazy? This was a huge, huge moment in American history.
On the day of the ceremony, they wanted everybody to know almost instantaneously. Another piece of foresight by Abraham Lincoln was, he told them, not only are you going to build a railroad, you're going to improve communication lines across the country. So build a telegraph line right alongside the tracks. So they hooked up the telegraph line to the last spike. They tied the telegraph wires around the spike and around the spike mall.
So everybody could hear it.
They heard the signal.
I see.
Started parades in cities all across the country. They were saying the Liberty Bell might have even rung with that celebration, because it was everybody was interested.
Yeah, I'm getting chills just hearing you say that. How exciting.
Yeah.
until this point, I've been going east to west following the trail that Thomas Durant laid for the Union Pacific Railroad. From this point on, I'm going to be following the Central Pacific Line, which though wasn't as long, went through the formidable Sierra Nevada, which are some of the highest mountain peaks in the U.S. All right, getting back on the Zephyr.
The next section of my journey takes me overnight through Nevada to the Donner Pass at Truckee. During the construction of this section of line, water and supplies had to be transported in for the laborers, who worked all day in the ferocious desert heat.
Thanks, Daryl.
Have a good one.
Nice to be in Truckee, the small town here in California, in the middle of the Sierra Nevadas, 7,000 feet up.
Modern-day Truckee is a small but historic town, settled as a direct result of the railroad and highway route through the mountains. The lake and pass got its name from an ill-fated group of emigrants who became trapped in the mountains in 1846 and had to resort to cannibalism in order to survive. Led by Charles Crocker, it took Central Pacific 4 years to lay track through these dramatic mountain peaks, a feat many believe to be impossible. This was the toughest part. 7 separate tunnels had to be dug out of some of the hardest rock in America. I'm off to meet historian Phil Sexton to find out how this extraordinary achievement was completed.
This is called by most people China Wall. It was built by Chinese labor, and it was built for a practical purpose. Above it is the roadbed for the 1865 route of the Central Pacific Railroad. It's really one of the great engineering achievements in America in the 19th century, because this is what's called a dry-laid wall. There is no mortar. These are locked like a jigsaw puzzle, and that's why it's so stable.
How did the Chinese even get involved with the railway?
There was an acute labor shortage of white males in California. A lot of California men had gone to Nevada to search for silver. So they needed labor, and in the city of Auburn, there was a Chinese population. They reluctantly hired them, and they thought, they really can't do anything. They're smaller than us, they're weaker than us, they don't speak our language, they don't know what they're doing, but they were there. And it turned out that the Chinese were such good workers, such fabulous workers, that the railroad began to search all over the western states for Chinese. They even sent contractors to Guangzhou province and brought back shiploads of Chinese.
Oh, what were the conditions like?
Some of the hardest granite in the world is here at Donner Pass, and this was done without power tools. This was done with black powder, steel drills to drill holes to fill with black powder and blow it up, and then shovels and picks to muck all of that waste out and dump it over the side. For a short time up here, the railroad introduced the use of nitroglycerin. It's much more powerful than black powder, so it doubled their progress. They went from 8 to 12 inches a day to 24 to 32 inches a day.
They were just going inches a day.
Inches a day.
So this whole process took how many years?
Nearly 2 years. 1,654 feet on 4 faces, nearly 2 years. Winter and summer, working essentially 24 hours a day.
Just for one tunnel?
Just for one tunnel.
Wow. And was it dangerous?
It's an avalanche zone, so there's hundreds and hundreds of tons of snow and ferocious winds. We know documented stories of entire barracks buildings being swept off the side of the mountain, buried in snow to where the body recoveries could not be done until the snow melted in spring.
Wow.
One of them wrote, "Gentlemen, you need to work as if heaven is before you and hell is behind you."
It's estimated that up to 1,000 of the 15,000 Chinese workers perished in the treacherous conditions. After building the Chinese wall, up to 500 kilograms of explosives were used each day in blasting the 7 tunnels. We're heading inside Tunnel 6 to take a closer look.
So here is actually more or less the beginning of the tunnel. This was the longest railroad tunnel in the world when it was built.
Really?
1,654 feet is the surveyed distance. I wanted to come in here to show you some of the blast evidence, and here's a good one right here. These are all at an angle so that nitroglycerin or powder can be poured into them and they won't fall out. You're seeing the very faces that the Chinese worked on. When you look up at the roofs of the tunnels, you're seeing remnants of the soot and the smoke from every locomotive that ever passed through. Imagine working in this tunnel and that's daylight for you.
Yeah.
That's where the world is. It's a very confining and very claustrophobic space.
Truckie's got one of the smallest platforms I've ever seen. And I don't see any staff here either, so I hope they remember to pick me up.
My final journey on the Transcontinental will take me 100 miles over the Sierra Nevada mountains to where the Central Pacific started in Sacramento.
All right, Sacramento, here we are.
Founded in 1848, Sacramento grew into a commercial center, supporting and supplying the local mines.
Old Town Sacramento. Is it just me, or did I step off the train and enter the set of an old Western film?
Today, Sacramento Old Town is beautifully preserved as a National Historic Landmark District.
The Transcontinental Railroad ended here because technically the Delta to San Francisco was just too wet to lay tracks on. Any goods that needed to get down to the coast were transferred onto cargo ships and then carried on downstream. Now today there is a train that goes to San Francisco, but in honor of tradition, I'm going to take a boat.
Cargo ships no longer run, so I'm taking a more modern option and heading 100 miles downstream to the Pacific Ocean and my final destination, San Francisco. Before the railroad, my journey would have been a 6-month slog across the continent. Today, this incredible rail adventure can be achieved in just 5 days.
I've made it. I've retraced the steps of the Transcontinental Railroad. I've seen for myself that the railroad revolution was a permanent manifestation of rapid, irreversible change. It simultaneously created a new way of life and destroyed another. But as the trains tracked their way across the continent, they carried with them the hopes and dreams of this nation.